Welcome to the Beautiful Struggle. I'm Audrey Goodman.
TJ Goodman.
Very good, man.
And once again, welcome to the Beautiful Struggle, where today we will be discussing the second part of the educational gap or the educational achievement gap and why it persists. But before we do that, let's tell you what Black Advancement is. Black Advancement is a nonprofit organization that seeks to create unity within the Black community through action and dialogue. This being the dialogue portion. So we're gonna go ahead and start it off with TJ. TJ, go ahead. What did you find through your research?
Well, it much of my research kind of led me to the conclusion that it persists for the same reason that it exists in the first place. Um, the politics haven't changed. The way that money is distributed hasn't changed in a long time. It's a capitalistic society, which means there's always going to be haves and have-nots, right? Unfortunately, when it comes to the educational system, um, the funding for the schools is kind of based on what it is that the property values and taxes and things like that um, are what are utilized to fund the schools. Which means if you're in an area where properties are not very valuable, then you know the taxes from that, of course, are not going to be nearly as significant as an affluent neighborhood. So the end result is an underfunded school, right? From the beginning, when we were on our side of town and everybody else was on their side of town, that was the case. Now there's been a bit more intermingling, I'll say, in more affluent neighborhoods, but for the most part, there's still a pretty big divide in this country when it comes to upper class and lower class, right? Maybe I shouldn't say lower class, but lower middle. Um, Most of us live check to check. I'll just say it that way. And if you are in a situation where even check to check is a struggle, then chances are you're going to be in one of those school systems that is not receiving proper funding. Um, I will say I was looking at this from a slightly different angle, trying to figure out if there was some way to shrink this gap. Um, it's a pretty tall task because of what I just laid out with the capitalism piece. But I guess I would wait for the solutions piece. But generally speaking, to sum it all up, it persists because the way that money is distributed has not changed. And we are still located in areas that are more on the low income side. And because that is the case, our schools are underfunded.
All right, well, that seems like a good opening. Greg, what did you find from your research for your opening statements?
Um, Basically the same exact thing that TJ found. It's just the case of the red line. Although it's not on the maps anymore, it still exists. Places with more income and a higher tax bracket get more money pumped into their school. Better money, better equipment, better facilities, and usually a better brand of teacher. And with all those things put together, in order to make it out of those kind of situations, you have to be an extraordinary student. And I mean, there's a reason why it's extraordinary because there aren't that many. You know what I'm saying? There's always a case of someone who I guess is an outlier and ends up making something of themselves, who are brought up in those situations in a lower income school system and a lower income place that they've grown up in, and basically underdeveloped, close to third world country conditions in a lot of these places. And there's very few. It takes a certain level of just God given smarts and ambition in order to make it out of these places. But for the most part, the average, it's basically starting everybody behind the eight ball. And that includes the teachers who have to come into these environments and teach with underfunded schools where not only is there just not enough money pumped into the actual school as a facility, there's not enough equipment pumped into the school as in books, computer labs, all kinds of things. And the conditions for the students and the teachers are miserable in some cases. I mean, it's hard to teach a class when it's freezing in the class in winter and kids haven't eaten. You know, there's a whole lot of other factors that can attribute to the gap in education. Some of it is can be purely based on conditions and focus. Others can be based on just the pure economics of the school and the quality of teachers that are coming to these schools. Because a lot of the teachers, even if they are good teachers, a lot of the teachers that are good that are coming in are brand new teachers who haven't really had their rhythm yet in dealing with students and how to get the best out of them. You know what I'm saying? By the time that they get to that level, a lot of those seasoned good teachers are up out of those kinds of schools and gone, and they just replace them with other rookies. And that usually doesn't last too long. And if it does last long and they do get something out of these kids, there's usually a promotion in the greener pastures for them later. So nothing that is worthwhile generally gets to stays in lower economic schools.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're gonna move on to the discussion part now. I'll start it with a question actually. So like there was a comment that was made after our first round of discussions was launched and put out there, where a guy kind of mentioned the idea of culture being a bigger factor than money, which I think has something to it. But basically, he was using the Asians as everyone does as kind of like his bellwether for, hey, their culture would suggest that they're going to do education a little bit better than most people do. In terms of like the fact that they view education with a high regard, so to speak, and maybe the Black community doesn't do that as much. So I'm leading into a discussion. How do you guys feel about the pushback on something like that, as opposed to it just being all economics?
Well, some of what he has to say is true, but then you have to look where the culture came from, because this is just a Black American issue when it comes to these things. Because the students that come from Africa, it's a different atmosphere too, because there's a significance on education and everything else, but that also has to do with the fact that they have something to look back on with pride and dignity. And this in a Black American experience, when you look back, there's small examples here and there, but for the most part, what we're taught is slavery, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Barack Obama, now you're here. So there's nothing really to draw from. There's no real history or anything or legacy that we have that is based on something to draw from, so to speak, other than a lot of bad news and hardships. So, and the reason for that still kind of goes back to school, because we aren't taught any of the great things that we've done throughout school, which is why I don't see how so many people are opposed to critical race theory within the school. If you learn about yourself, it can help you to focus on yourself, because all you hear is that you've contributed nothing to this country and you've been a burden. And then Martin Luther King came along and made a speech, and then somehow Barack Obama became president. There's really nothing to lean on and draw in from the experience of, I've seen this before, I know we can do this. The only experience we usually have with that is, sports and entertainment. So that's where a lot of the kids' minds is focused on, the sports and entertainment, because we don't focus on the heroes that we have based on other things. There's no classes that they have where they focus on Roland Martin having the first Black-owned media company, and there's no real focus on a guy like Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's not even a focus on someone like Ben Carson, who I hate as a politician, but as an individual and a doctor, amazing story. But there's no focus on these stories of Black greatness within schools. You don't learn about this. So if you have nothing to draw from, except for Michael Jordan and LeBron James, then that's where your heroes are, and that's where your focus lies. Like even someone like and like I said, these people that do make these achievements are extraordinary people. I mean, these are this the people that are doing these things are not average, regular, walking down the street fellas. You know what I'm saying? These are extraordinary men. And if all you have yourself to compare to is extraordinary men, then it's hard to see yourself in that light for some people. So it's based on heroship and who you get to have in its example to follow. Like even a guy like Stephen A. Smith, he'll tell you that you can't be the next Shaq. Your chances of being the next LeBron James are slim, but you can't be the next Stephen A. Smith. And even that is a stretch, because if it was so easy to be a guy like Stephen A. Smith, there'd be a bunch of Stephen A. Smiths. So what we need to do is focus on the achievements that we've had within our communities, and we need to have those taught within the school and probably within our homes in order for us to have something to focus on to make these achievements. Like Chinese people, they have lots of examples within their own neighborhoods and everything else. There's lots of ownership. There's a rich history. They know where they come from. They know they can trace their roots back and everything else. Same with the Africans for the most part. We're the only ones that have this whole mystery legacy behind us that we have no idea about. So self-education is a great way to counteract that culture that we have, because the only culture that we have, we didn't build. Our culture is based on white stereotypes that was given to us that have followed us for the last 450 years.
TJ.
Yeah, it's an interesting question that they pose about the culture. And, Asian is a very, special example. I've had occasion to go and live in and even, visit some Asian countries. And the level of discipline is really, really impressive that I saw. It's just built into the culture. This specifically was the Japanese culture, and the value that they place on education is very high, as you mentioned, or whomever posed the question mentioned. And I agree with Greg about him saying that it's a Black American thing. I mean, you look at other parts of the world where Black people live. I guess Black people live everywhere, but every so often you'll see clips of some completely dilapidated school somewhere in some poor African country. But every kid in there, they got no shoes, but they're paying attention and taking notes and trying to educate themselves so that they can, raise themselves and their family out of the poverty that they're living in. I don't really fully understand why education is not valued higher in our Black American culture. I don't know if it's, if you do live in a more poor type neighborhood, I guess the people that you see that you consider successful may not have gotten that way through your standard education, right? Greg had mentioned, LeBron James and these other, phenomenal people that are ultra uber talented and work their butts off to make it in, entertainment or sports or something like that. And those are maybe the examples that you end up looking to because they came from where you came from. And that's a very different path than somebody who lived in, a neighborhood and all the people that are making it are doctors and engineers and lawyers and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go as far as to say that they have a point, because it's not as though you can paint every Black person with the same brush. And in my experience as a Black American, everywhere that I've been, education has been valued, by the generation that came before us, right? They were part of the civil rights movement, the civil rights march, and what they have tried to pass down are those values. So I'm not exactly sure why it hasn't, I guess, caught fire. Greg, go ahead. You want to say something?
I can tell you why.
Mm.
Where they in the schools that they came up in, it was just all Black schools. So the teachers there was a pride in there with them teaching these students. There was a care there. There was a push there. Now, once schools got desegregated and we started mixing schools, you dealt with teachers that weren't necessarily fans of you. So there was less care and more beatdown without reasoning. It's like being punished and not knowing why you're being punished. So a lot of that going on. So the care of the student teacher relationship was different. I believe that's what was a main factor in it. So you take away that I guess that nourishment from the teachers that you usually get. I mean, even sometimes it's probably a lot of tough love, but it was love nonetheless. So once you take that out and it's just tough and no love, that changes a lot of viewpoints of students. Not to mention there was also the crack era, and they stopped the vocational programs for Black students, and everything else. There's just a myriad of things that changed within that generation and the next generation. You take out all the vocational schools, you desegregate the schools, and you have teachers that don't care about you, not to mention the racism you'd have to deal with going to some of these schools. There's other factors going in, like busing for 2 hours to school and all these other things. It's just a myriad of different problems, and you're still going to a poor school. Like Chris Rock, he got bused from a poor neighborhood in the Bronx or Brooklyn to a different poor neighborhood that was a white poor neighborhood. So he was still in a poor school. Now he just got to deal with a racism and a poor school. So that's where those things, that's the difference, at least in my opinion.
No, that makes some sense. I think what also may be at the root of it is expectation, right? Culture is one thing, but in my experience with children will meet whatever expectations placed upon them. If you put high expectations on them, they will figure out a way to elevate to get there. If you put low expectations on them, even if they have the aptitude to perform highly, they'll probably sink down to where those expectations are. And that may have something to do with the teachers you were talking about no longer nourishing the students potentially and putting low expectations on them, right? But there's got to be, I guess ultimately we need more of those expectations to be held up within the household, especially if you're not getting them at the school. And, the Asian culture, since that's what was brought up, the expectation is that they're going to be good students, they're going to do well in school, right? That not just from the whatever stereotypes the teacher walks into the situation with, if they have them, but also their parents. If they go home and they have some substandard grades or they didn't meet expectation of their parents, then being a disappointment is a pretty scary thing for all for a lot of the Asian community that I've interacted with. That's something that they really did everything in their power to avoid, was being a disappointment to their parents. So, of course, I can't speak for all Asian people, but the ones that I've interacted with, that was a big driver for them. So even if they weren't geared towards being a great student, they had to do it so that they could make sure that their parents were satisfied with their performance.
True.
And maybe, the breakdown in a lot of cases of the family structure in our culture, maybe that's also caused some of this as well.
Yeah. that also has something to do with I would think the wealth gap too,
Yeah.
because most Asian parents in this country, most of the Asian community is pretty successful as far as money is concerned and earning power. A lot of the students that I'm talking about, a lot of parents working two jobs, and if they have both parents, still usually both working lots of hours trying to keep the lights on, or it's one parent with two jobs not really being able to be around, or um, just the environment outside of the house that the parents can't control. In some cases, once the kid gets to a certain age, what they're doing. But my concern is with the elementary level, because if you catch it at the elementary level, it works out. But a lot of those cases, like I said, it's a rough road, especially coming out of what was the crack era. So, you know, a lot of that took away and broke up a lot of families, whether it be prison, murder, or drug use. So this is the environment that they're coming. A lot of these people are coming up in and being raised by uh, uh, people that made it through the crack era as children. So it's a different environment for a lot of these kids' home lives than it is in Asian communities.
Let's go ahead and go to the last section of our discussion, which is the solution section. Again, if you don't have a solution to give, that's fine. You can just say pass. But if you do have some ideas, or at least something that you think should be brought to the table, by all means. And we'll start with Greg on this one.
One solution is a very pie in the sky type solution that will probably never happen, but it will be to take the tax money and spread it out equally throughout all the schools. I understand that people of in better neighborhoods have earned their money and they want their money spent in their neighborhood and everything else. But for the country as a whole, it would be best to have everyone have the best facilities possible so this country as a whole can succeed better. And let's just take the selfishness out of it and spread the wealth evenly through the school system so that everyone has the same opportunity to achieve. And if everybody has the same opportunity to achieve, it makes this country stronger in the end. That's one. The second solution is we need more community centers and places for after school programs for kids. So once they're done with school, depending on their home situation, they have somewhere to go so they can sit there, do their homework, study, have some mentors there to help them out, and have someone that cares enough to make sure that they're trying to achieve. That's the other solution, which is probably the more plausible solution because the other one's it's just not going to happen. So, but that would be my solution: is more programs to give kids opportunities to have help with things that they did not get in school. Because unfortunately, like I said, with the parent dynamic in a lot of these places, sometimes their parents are just out wilding and doing whatever. In other cases, they're out working all over the place and they're too busy working to keep the lights on to really give these kids the help that they need if they fall behind or if they need help. And once you get behind, it's a tough place to dig out of. So more mentorship within these communities would probably be the best thing for these kids. That's the best solution that I can think of that's practical enough to actually work. Now, how you build those programs and the way you build those programs and where you put these community centers, or you can have it at churches, any place. But there needs to be more facilities and after school programs to help children, especially young kids, to just help them get over the hump. And it's a great way to give back to the community as well.
TJ, solutions.
Well, like I was saying, a lot of this from what what I research, a lot of it is just plain and simple comes down to money, comes down to funding. Greg had laid out very well about the teachers, the disparity in the quality of teachers when you have issues with underfunded schools. I mean, you get some go-getters in the beginning, but they're not going to stay very long, right? Programs that are needed for kids um, won't be in existence. The classrooms will be overpopulated, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that are byproducts of underfunded schools. Um, so, like you said, what's the solution? How do we fix it? I mean, I guess the first one would be to make sure that, since we're talking about the states themselves, right? The money comes from, right there where you are. Having a voice and voting for people that are education minded or education forward is one way to maybe help the situation, right? Because there's probably some politicians out there whose platform is education, and if you're serious about trying to close this gap, then maybe that's a good way to start. I had thought about some way of redrawing district lines, every so often to try to make it so that funds were allocated more evenly across a geographic area. But that's a lot of work. It's very difficult. And, who's going to be the ones responsible for drawing the lines, right? People will just move, right? People want their kids to have the best if they can afford it. So if their kid is in a situation that they don't feel is good enough, then they'll just move, right? They can just move. They got the resources to do it. So the district line thing may or may not work. Free internet, right? Free internet for everybody would be very helpful. The further you fall behind, I mean, nowadays, technology moves so quickly. If the kids don't have access, like good internet access, then they're going to fall behind regardless. So free internet access across the state would be a good starting point as well. But I was looking at this from a different angle. I was thinking to myself, okay, if the states themselves are having to fund these public schools, what else are the states fund? How can we maybe reallocate things? And I started thinking, I was like, oh, well, of course, the prisons. Most, if not every state has a prison. So I started looking into what is spent per student and what is spent per inmate. And do you know what I saw? It blew my mind, right?
Way more spent on inmates.
You want to share that? You want to share that on the screen, TJ?
Yeah. If I can, let me see. Let me try this again here. So check this out. Now, in this instance, the orange or yellow, depending on depending on your eye, the lighter color is the cost per student, and the blue one is the cost per inmate, right?
Yep.
Now, if you follow these lines here, there's not one orange dot that's further to the right than any of the blue ones. So, Greg, like you said, more money is definitely spent on inmates. But if you just kind of look at the ratios, they're anywhere from double on the smaller side to like 4 times as much.
Yes.
So, it got me to thinking, well, can we take some of the funding that is being, spent for an inmate? Not all of it, of course, right? Because, I know that, prisons also complain about being underfunded. Just, take some and allocate it towards the schools instead. Not every school, because we're talking about a gap here, right? There are some schools, or maybe even a decent number of schools that have what they need, but the ones that don't, that's where it's going to matter. And taking, a few thousand from the right side in this drawing and allocating it to those few schools that really need it, I think would be a solution that could be helpful on both sides, right? I mean, the more that time and energy that you spend on students, the fewer inmates that you're going to have in the future as well, right? So maybe it'll solve two things at once, or was it two birds with one stone, or whatever? Yeah, that's that's it. Two birds with one stone. Can't get fooled again. All right.
Well, so see, I like where you're headed with it, but the only thing is there's the numbers are skewed where it looks really bad, but the reason why the numbers on the prison side are so high is because that is housing and feeding adults 365 days of the year. It's going to cost a lot more.
Yeah,
it's a lot more money to take care of that. Not to mention they have to cover their medical and everything else in there. It is a good place where your mind is at, but I don't know how much of that
I'm not
actually
we cut it in
take
half.
away from.
Yeah.
You said what?
I'm not suggesting we cut it in half. But
no, I'm not saying you cut it in half. I'm just saying I don't know how much you can actually take from the prison system,
right?
Based on all of that.
I don't know either. But
what you could do, in all
some.
honesty, is take some away from the police. They always have more money than they need.
And that's our show, folks. We'd like to thank everybody for tuning in.
I'm just saying, they always have more money than they need.
That's all.
Like taking a couple of $1,000s from the police is not going to kill the police. It's not going to destroy their operation.
That's all. They have
tanks. Like there's no need for tanks. Most
people watching. You can see this and more at the Black Advancements YouTube channel, or go to our website, which is www.blackadvancement.com. Till next time, peace and
fair enough.